What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So here's the deal. I don't really like cringy, like cliche YouTube style videos where people talk about like top favorite things. Here's my 5 best things about this car, or 5 things I hate about this car. So I always swore to myself that I would never do those types of videos. This video is not like that video. However, what I do have is I have a lot of experience with this car. So I'm not a mechanic, I'm not a technician, I'm not an engineer or anything like that. But what I do have is roughly about 13 years of experience with the 4G63 platform. So with that being said, one thing that I've noticed is a lot of people don't do real research anymore. And I understand, kind of the old days, you used to go into forums and kind of research and that type of stuff. And like nowadays, people just want quick answers. So they basically do the whole Facebook thing where they ask questions, or, they do the YouTube thing. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cover a few things that essentially just are problematic with these cars, issues and different things that go wrong with this basically this platform. Mainly going to cover the Evo 8 and 9 platform, but basically issues that Evos potentially have. And I'm not going to cover anything too crazy. Like I stated before, I'm not a mechanic, so if you're having obviously engine issues, then you need to actually get the help of a professional. I'm just going to cover very simple things that a lot of Evo owners or people looking to get an Evo don't actually know about. So let's go ahead and dive in. So the first one I'm going to talk about is actually a very simple one. I'm going to go ahead and open the gas door. And a lot of people don't know this, but when you open the gas door, the thing that actually makes it pop is this little plastic clip that goes right there. And basically what ends up happening through time is they break and they fall apart, and a lot of people don't even realize that they're there. So you end up buying this car, some people do, and this thing never opened, and they're having to use like credit cards and little tiny screwdrivers to get this thing open. I even at one point had to use a water bottle and basically put it underneath the little thing and came out here real quick and just kind of tugged it, as I had something pretty much holding the little lever up. But this is a very simple fix. All it is that little plastic thing. So my recommendations for you guys is to, when you get to the dealership, go ahead and buy a few of these. And here's the part number for those that are interested. These things are like $3, nothing crazy. So I always keep some spares just in case. So that's my recommendation for you guys. Really simple, easy fix. It's only a matter of time before those things fall apart. I've already gone through probably 3 or 4 since I've owned the car. So over time, I just end up buying these, and I just throw them in the glove box and kind of just keep them there just in case. All right, guys, the next thing I wanted to talk about is a very common issue with Evos. And this only applies to Evo 8s, the 2005 version, and obviously Evo 9s. So notice that I have that tarmac, gravel, and snow. And basically it's this ACD button right here. So what this is active center differential. And it's basically a pump, and I'll go ahead and show you in a little bit, but it's a pump that basically feeds the diff. And I'll go ahead and turn the car on so you guys can see. But notice how only one light came up. That means that my ACD is working just fine. So obviously I can switch it around, and it'll switch by pressing that button right there. But basically, that just means that the car is working properly, and well, the pump is working properly. But what you'll notice is with a lot of Evos is that the 3 lights are on, and what that essentially means is that your pump is bad. So you can either replace it, or honestly just get rid of it, or just leave it alone. Honestly, I just recommend you leave it alone, because it's not worth it unless you're rallying this car and racing it in that type of event, or that setting. I don't think it's necessary for you to have ACD personally. So I'll go ahead and show you what the pump actually looks like. All right guys, so this is what the pump looks like. So I have an aftermarket reservoir, but the pump basically just sits down here in the front of the engine bay. And I'll go ahead and try to get you guys a picture so you're able to see what the pump actually looks like overall. It's actually a pretty big unit. But that's basically it. If you are experiencing these, then that means that your pump is essentially bad. So just your ACD is not working. All right guys, the next thing I want to talk about is something that's very common with Evos, and with the Evo 8s and 9s that is. And what Mitsubishi did is they basically put a harness down in this kick panel area, and what ends up happening is if you daily drive this car at any point, water gets channeled in here and basically corrodes this harness. And with that being said, you end up with all kinds of electrical issues. So my car used to have it to where the wipers would basically just stop wherever they wanted, and I ended up getting this fixed through warranty, and they fixed it. But I know a lot of Evo owners have this issue, so if you're dealing with any kind of electrical issues in the car, such as that, or maybe your radio's all over the place, or your lights are flickering everywhere, chances are that it's that harness down there. And what you need to do is you need to go ahead and Google, just go ahead and Google this, Evo electrical gremlins. And that's gonna bring you to a thread on Evo M where it discusses how to basically fix it. And depending on how severe yours is, you may need to obviously get professional help, but that is a very, very common thing with Evos. So it's worth taking a look at, and you never know, it could be an easy fix for you. So go ahead and do that. All right guys, while I'm in here, one more thing that's very common in Evos is if you're experiencing this, where you basically turn the key on and clutch is in and the car just does this, it just keeps doing that and continues to do that, chances are your ignition switch is bad. So the way to fix this is this switch in here is actually going bad or bad. So you can either replace it, or you can end up, a lot of times what ends up happening is the screw that holds it on actually loosens and ends up causing this issue. So if you're experiencing this, you're gonna need to pop this off. It's a couple screws down here, pop this off, and you could either replace it or try to tighten it and see if it works. One way to bypass this is to press really hard once you actually go ahead and put the key in. So I'm pressing in it. Notice how it's clicking now. So that's one thing you can do. I actually already attempted to replace this, and I thought it ended up being the screw being loose because it worked pretty well for a while, but then it started doing it again. So I went ahead and bought a new one. I unboxed it and everything, thinking I was gonna install it. But I'll get you guys this part number. It's roughly about $100. I got this from STM a few years ago. So I do plan on installing the new one, so this issue kind of goes away. But this is very common in Evo. It's very frustrating, especially when you're like at car meets and stuff and you're trying to just start your car and it's giving you these issues. It's not a very good look. All right, the next thing I wanted to talk about only applies to the Evo 9. And luckily I haven't had this issue, but I've seen and heard horror stories about this Myvec Bolt right here. So the Evo 9s are equipped with Myvec, which is essentially Mitsubishi's version of VTEC. And in order to obviously replace the intake cam, you're gonna need to remove that bolt right over there. And what ends up happening is that bolt gets stuck, and I've seen really, really bad things with that bolt. So luckily I had somebody, the guys at Force Fed do my cams, so I didn't even have to touch it, and they obviously knew what they were doing, so they had the right tools. So that's an issue that a lot of Evo 9 owners really, really have. So something to look out for. All right guys, the next thing I wanted to talk about has to do with oil starvation. So the 4G63, the head of the 4G63 as a whole ends up taking up too much oil. And this only applies really if you're tracking the car like at, you know, doing autocross or time attack or circuit race and that type of stuff. But basically what ends up happening is too much oil ends up in the valve train and it ends up starving basically the oil pan. So if you're driving this car hard through corners and whatnot, basically you could potentially end up starving the car for oil. So there's two things you can do for this. And one of them is I've already done, and I'll show you a quick clip of it, but Kigley makes it's called an HLA, and it's basically a thing that restricts the amount of oil that goes through the valve train. So that's the first thing you can do. And the second thing is a lot of people end up actually replacing the oil pan to get something with more baffles, so that the oil kind of ends up sitting, so that the car basically ends up, you can put more oil in it and more of it will stay in the pan, so that you don't basically restrict the engine from, you know, oil and whatnot. So that's a very common issue with these cars. All right guys, the next thing I wanted to talk about is more of a tip rather than an issue, but what it basically is. A lot of people don't know this, but they end up taking this little vent. And I obviously have the Rally Art one, but they take out this little vent in order to basically thinking that they are making it better for the car, it'll breathe better, and you're actually doing more harm than good by taking that vent off. So the way it was explained to me by some very knowledgeable people is these vents are designed to kind of flow with how the air is obviously going, which is obviously going this way. So by you removing this, you are essentially trapping the hot air and not allowing it to flow freely. So I actually have the other one over here so you guys get a better view. But basically what ends up happening is there's the air and then it's being channeled that way. When you remove this, you basically stop the air from coming up and trap it in there. So I don't think this is an issue if you're just daily driving the car and you just want it because, you know, you want people to see your nice manifold or to be able to see through it. I don't think you're gonna cause any issues, but if you plan on tracking this car and driving it hard for minutes at a time, this could be a potential issue for overheating, essentially. So you're basically, you're not helping by removing this and not allowing that air to flow freely and go with the actual like contours of the car. So that's more of a tip rather than an actual like issue, but just something I've known that I see a lot of people do because they think they're actually helping, but they're actually just making it worse. So if I were you and you have this, I would just put it back on. If you have a dump tube or anything like that, obviously you're gonna run into some issues. You might wanna consider cutting one out, or you can leave it alone, it's up to you, but it's just something that you guys might wanna know. All right guys, the last thing that I wanted to talk about is a very simple one. So if you are struggling, basically, if you have a wingless trunk and your trunk is basically just slamming open, it's because you are missing, more than likely, either you have an extra bar. So I'll go ahead and grab it, but it looks like this. And I've obviously removed mine because I don't have a wing anymore and I have a very light carbon fiber trunk. But basically what it is it's a little bar that acts like a spring, and it's actually installed right over there, as you can tell. But notice I only have one. These cars from factory, unless you have an RS, they're designed basically to have a wing on it, and that wing is significantly heavier than not having a wing. So what ends up happening is obviously the trunk thinks it has a wing, so you have this extra bar on there and the thing slams open. So it's a pretty easy fix. All you need is pretty much a pry bar, and you basically just need to pry off one of those bars and you'll be good to go. All right guys, that's basically it for the tips and issues. I didn't want to go too technical like I stated before. There's a few other things that obviously to look for, like obviously if you're driving the car and you're hearing constant whining, chances are your transfer case is pretty much on its last legs. So that might be something that you want to look into, but I didn't want anybody to have to come back here and kind of blame me for giving them faulty or bad advice. So I wanted to stick to basically things that are kind of simple and don't really require an actual like a diagnosis. So these are all simple things, and hopefully you found some value in some of the stuff here. If you guys like this type of video, I can go ahead and make some more. That's not an issue at all. Like I stated before, I've owned this car for 13 years, so a lot of research and a lot of experience in this platform. So just let me know what you'd like to see in the comments if you wish to see something else. But other than that, guys, that pretty much covers everything. Take it easy, and I'm out. Peace.